You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. I'm Chris Davis, your host. The Blues and Arts Hour is brought to you every Friday by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. And you are in for a treat today because the Blues and Arts Hour, we're going to be putting the blues in that or taking the blues out of it, however you want to put it. I'll say blues specialist, someone who really knows about the blues, because I learned a lot about the blues from him. He's not a blues man, but he is a blues professor. So we're going to take the academic route today with Chip Mitchell of Delta State University. He was my professor of blues music. Yes, I did take a blues class. And that is one of the things that Delta State offers, by the way, that is kind of unique to the Mississippi Delta. I don't know. They might have blues classes in other places, but taking it in the Mississippi Delta, that's something you can only do at Delta State. So, Chip, I want to welcome you in here and say it's good to have you.
Well, thank you for having me this morning. It's always great talking with you. You know, you're just a consummate professional and definitely always on top of everything, current events, and always just really interesting to talk to. So this is kind of fun for me. Oh,
well, I'm flattered and glad to be your host this morning, as well as everybody else's. But I tell you, the way I met Chip Mitchell is it wasn't in the blues class. I was taking a rock and roll class from his wife, who is also a Delta State professor, and you came in to give a lecture on Van Halen. Not only are you a blues expert, but you know about Van Halen, and I didn't know about Gary Cherone until you told me.
Yeah, man, that's when I barely remember. So, but my wife is a professor of music at Delta State, and when she first got here, she was assigned to teach the history of rock and roll class, and so she's a classical musician by training. So one reason why we hit it off, we actually met at Delta State, was I have this sort of long memory of American popular music, and definitely for rock and roll and blues and everything in between. So our relationship really started talking about all these great musicians, classic rock, you name it. That's what I kind of cut my teeth on, but then got into the blues thanks to those guys like Led Zeppelin or Eric Clapton. I can remember listening to Traveling Riverside Blues by Led Zeppelin, and they mentioned Rosedale in it, and I was like, is there a Rosedale in England? And then I realized, somebody said, no, that's Rosedale, Mississippi. So, this is when I was like 11 or 12. So.
That's one thing that always fascinated me about Cream, and the Eric Clapton, the Crossroads that he did, which was not the pure Crossroads Blues by Robert Johnson, was kind of a hybrid between two different songs. But I knew there was a Rosedale, Mississippi, because I grew up here. I grew up watching, when I was a kid in Yazoo City. We lived right on the edge of the Delta. I mean, literally on the edge. We were on a big hill that overlooked cotton fields. And we picked up Jackson TV stations, and we picked up WABG, Channel 6. And I watched the news every day, even when I was 4 and 5 years old. I was a news junkie. And I would hear them talk about Rosedale. And that stuck in my mind. And then when I was a teenager, when I was listening to Cream and listening to that song, I was like, Rosedale, they're talking about Mississippi.
Yep. Crossroad Blues, it's a classic cut. And, there's a line in Martin Scorsese's Blues documentary that came out about 20 years ago talking about, they were interviewing all the English musicians, and they kept making jokes about the cotton fields along the Thames River in England, which, of course, don't exist. But it's amazing how in, English rock and roll, how much, especially in those early days, those guys were beholden to Mississippi musicians. I think Keith Richards and Mick Jagger struck up their friendship over a Muddy Waters album. So
now, I remember watching that movie with Ralph Macchio, Crossroads, and he's got these tapes. He's listening to Robert Johnson, but that is the way that a lot of people got familiar with the blues. This set came out, I guess it was it the early 60s? Set of Robert Johnson songs came out. That was a reissue because he hadn't really been heard a lot since the late 30s when those shellac 78s came out, or the Terraplane Blues. And I think that was his only song really that got anywhere. But he had been in obscurity for a long time.
And, that's sort of a common misconception that Robert Johnson in the late 1930s was this tremendous star in the black blues scene. He was definitely a regional star. You mentioned Terraflame Blues. It did okay. It sold like 5,000 copies, but by no means was he a superstar. And it really was sort of this embrace by white rock and rollers in Britain and America that kind of elevated him to this status, this mystique. Plus the story of, selling your soul to the devil, which he actually borrowed from Tommy Johnson from Crystal Springs, Mississippi, just has always fascinated people,
Oh, Robert was born not too far from Crystal Springs.
Hazelhurst, yes, that's my mom's hometown, so...
Well, and I went down there a few years ago when they had a dedication of the Robert Johnson Highway and got to meet his grandson, Claude, and his son, and interview them. And they were the kindest people. But behind the scenes, there was this lawsuit brewing, and I don't know if it's ever been resolved.
Yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I know Steve LeVere, the late Steve LeVere, basically... He owned the music for when they re-released it in the early 90s, and that, of course, sent it into another level of or another generation of music fans and musicians who discovered Robert Johnson all over again. And with that, it went gold, that collection of Robert Johnson songs that LeVere owned, so he made a lot of money off of it. And so that's when, there were debates on who actually owned the rights. And also, there was an inheritance question. Robert Johnson had outside children, and so So there's a lot of debate of who was actually a relative, who wasn't. And, it was one of those kind of news stories in the '90s that I haven't really thought much about. I love Robert Johnson, but. And I love the fact that he is a way into the blues, but there's so much more about the blues that. As people dig deeper into it and get beyond Robert Johnson, that's really kind of a goal. Listen to other musicians from that era besides Robert Johnson, and you'll be absolutely blown away. But also, just listen to everything. A lot of the young guys that are coming out now, everybody from Kingfish to John Tavius Willis over in Georgia, they're just producing some great music right now. And, definitely love the old stuff, but also listen to the new stuff.
We've got some Cedric Burnside to play.
Yeah, Cedric, Cedric, you can call him young, but he's probably a little bit younger than me. So young is all relative in the blues world. But, of course, he grew up in R.L. Burnside's household and learned so much from him. I think his first gig was in, Toronto, Canada, playing drums. For his grandfather at one of the big blues festivals. I think he was 12 years old. So, he's got this 30-plus year blues career that started in his childhood. And it's great to see him, get Grammy recognition and become this, major blues world figure. Plus, he's doing a great job of continuing that North Mississippi Hill Country blues sound that was so earth-shattering for, kind of alternative music fans in the 90s. So that's great to see that continuation. Plus, he's a great guy. I've met him a couple of times and just really down to earth. And one thing I do like about him is, a lot of blues guys have connections to black gospel music and the church music. And he's one of the few exceptions. He's I didn't go to church. I grew up in a juke joint. I didn't, listen to gospel. I casually listen to it, but the church is not my background. So this guy is, definitely Saturday night rather than Sunday morning blues.
Well, coming up in just a minute, you're going to hear some of the blues that we've been talking about here on the Blues and Arts Hour as we talk with a blues expert, Chip Mitchell, Don Allen Mitchell, a professor at Delta State University. That's coming up on the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You've got the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB, brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. And today's very special guest is my blues professor from back when I was at Delta State University, Chip Mitchell. Chip, we're going to talk about some blues that come from just down the road here.
Well, yeah. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, using the world of Robert Johnson's music to get into early recordings of blues like Skip James. I think this cut was probably from circa 1931. And it's a great story. Nehemiah Skip James was from Bentonia, Mississippi. And back in the late 20s, early 30s, the albums were sending out, the recording companies were sending out A&R men. And basically, they found out that there was this market for early country music, old-time music. There was a market for blues music. And so basically, they were recording everything. They didn't know if it was going to sell. There was no advanced marketing strategies or whatever. And so they recorded a lot of musicians. But then, of course, the Great Depression basically ended a lot of commercial recordings for a while. And so there were these albums floating around and became the provenance of collectors, record collectors. And so in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, these young folks, beatniks or sort of alternative music fans, rediscovered all these old shellac discs. The problem is they couldn't figure out what happened to the musicians. And Skip James was one of those guys. And so there was this whole movement of trying to figure out where these guys were, if they were still alive, were they still performing? And that's how we sort of rediscovered people like Mississippi John Hurt, as well as Son House, who will play, I think, too, as well. So it's just a great story. You had all these sort of, people from the North, people from England, fascinated by the sound of this music, but then they wanted to go to the roots of the music. And so they would come to Mississippi and just scour the back roads to find people. The way they found John Hurt is a great story. He recorded one side that was called Avalon Blues, and they couldn't figure out what Avalon Blues, what he meant by that. And somebody just was looking at a map of Mississippi, and they saw the Delta community of Avalon, and they said, well, why don't we go there and just, ask around? And sure enough, they went to Avalon and said, do you know John Hurt? And somebody said, yeah, he's right over there. And so John Hurt had a new career. He had quit really playing, on the club circuit. He was an older man by that point. But they put him on the folk circuit. So he was playing these folk festivals up and down the Northeast corridor, playing overseas. And he became kind of a rock star, if you will, as much as you're going to be for playing country blues. And so that's just a great story of American music, is this rediscovery of these guys like Skip James, like John Hurt, like Son House. So yes, Robert Johnson died, but these guys continued to live on for many, many years. And near the end of their life, they had this moment where they could be stars. And that's, a terrific story. They could make a living as musicians. So,
well, let's hit Crow Jane.
And I want to dig her grave with a silver spade. And I ain't gonna let nobody take her place. No, you can't take her place. And I never missed that water till my well went dry. Didn't miss Crow Jane until the day she died. That's the reason I back Crow Jane. Not only to someday, baby, you got to die. You got to lay down. And I dug that woman's grave 8 feet in the ground. And I didn't feel sorry until they let her down. I had to let her down. That's the reason I back Crow Jane. Not only do I. Someday, baby, you got to die.
Skip James of Bentonia, Crow Jane.
And what's great about Skip James is there's a direct connection to the Blue Front Cafe in beautiful downtown Bentonia, Mississippi. He played there. He knew the owners. Of course, Jimmy Duck Holmes owns it now and remembers, stories about Skip James. So there's this great continuation of the Bentonia blues tradition, and it's its own distinct style. But I've always loved the fact that Skip James recordings, he'll sing in falsetto like that. It's just sort of one of those goosebump moments, because it's just something you wouldn't expect from listening to a lot of blues. You associate the Mississippi Delta style with more of a shouting style, and there's this sort of sweet acoustic with this falsetto overlay of vocals that just makes it really fun to listen to.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that fascinates people with, and I go back to Robert Johnson, but that he could play any style and sing in any style almost. I mean, he would sing anything from blues to what we might call country music or close to it. And then, something that was really close to maybe swing with from 4 until 8. But there was not a limit back then. There wasn't this mass media that people were listening to that by ear limited what they were willing to do.
Right. And two, this sort of hails back to what we call the songster tradition. These guys, to make a living as itinerant blues players, they basically were human jukeboxes. And so they played whatever the host of the party wanted to play. So if it was a black juke joint, then they were going to play blues. If it was a white dance party, then they would play more music in the line of sort of old time country music. So they and they would do it from memory, right? They weren't carrying around boxes and boxes of sheet music. So then, of course, you can imagine, because I know Chris plays a lot, sort of the cross-pollination of all these styles, that the sounds influence each other. Plus, early radio with playing this kind of music, if you're lucky to pick up radio stations in the rural countryside of Mississippi. Really, in the 20s, you couldn't. It was still pretty. There was a lack of electricity, but as you got closer to urban areas, you may hear music. And just because, there are not that many stations out there, you're going to listen to anything if you're a music fan. So, B.B. King talks about when he was a kid of listening to, like, the Grand Ole Opry and, just loving it, right? And here's these guys playing music that he was familiar with, talking about rural America, and it just totally clicked into place for him. So yeah, the common misperception is that there was a strict segregation of music styles for these guys, and it really wasn't. Like I said, they could play about anything. The best guys, wanted to make a living at it, so whatever the house wanted, they would play.
Great thing about radio, it's for everybody.
Yes.
All right, coming up in just a minute, you heard us talking about Mississippi John Hurt. You're actually going to hear some of his music in that one-of-a-kind guitar-picking style right here on the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. I'm your host, Chris Davis. The Blues and Arts Hour is brought to you every week by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music. And the guest this week sitting across from me is Chip Mitchell, Professor Chip Mitchell of Delta State University. And he is talking about the blues this morning, as I'm sure he's not quite like Bobby Rush said when he was on the program. I get up in the morning talking about the blues. I go to bed singing the blues. I don't know if you got it that bad, do you?
No, I mean, I definitely love it. I definitely listen to it. But, I mean, he is the blues life, right?
Yep.
For a very long time. But I can tell you, I love watching him perform because he has sort of a clean show for family and kind of, broadcast quality. And then he has sort of his blue material show. And it's just amazing to watch.
And when he goes blue, he goes blue.
He goes blue, yeah. And, that's really, for many years, that's how he made his living, was on the Chitlin circuit playing these adult-oriented shows for African-American clubs. And the dancers alone are probably illegal in 38 of the 50 states,
and getting paid in chitlins. Exactly.
Yeah. So, great tradition that has given us a lot of great music is that Chitlin circuit of black clubs. Soul blues, of course, still has a lot of commercial viability. Of course, Jackson's Malaco Records is critical in that market, and so. if you talk to black music fans and you mention the blues just casually, they, a lot of them around here will think about soul blues and Mallico and, performers like Bobby Rush. So it's an interesting, the word blues in itself, it gets applied to a lot of different genres.
That's true. I remember one of the best times I ever had emceeing a show was emceeing Willie Clayton and Lynn White.
Absolutely huge soul blues stars of the soul blues tradition. So that's great. And just wonderful to talk to, and they realize that they're never going to be like superstars. They do have regional fans, passionate fans, and so I think that plays into not sort of getting a big head or whatever, and always approachable. And I think the blues is like, especially with younger players right now, 60 Minutes did a feature, and Kingfish Ingram was heavily focused in it, and he basically said he knows he's never going to be at the top of the Billboard charts. So, he grew up humble. He's going to stay humble and immensely approachable. That's the great thing about a lot of blues players is, casual fans can talk to him before shows, after shows, and, they're happy to see you. It's obviously not 100% all the time, but I think they're very aware that the audience is definitely a niche audience. And,
I tell you, since we've gone down this rabbit hole, and we were talking about this while we were not, while our mics weren't on, why don't we talk about Alvin Youngblood Hart?
Yes.
Since we're going to play one of his songs.
Right. So Alvin is a great story. He grew up in Oakland, California, but he's got family roots in Mississippi. And grew up like we did, like listening to FM radio, getting into sort of classic rock. He's a big Thin Lizzy fan. And so he learned a lot about playing guitar from just listening and trying to play along with records. He's a huge, soul music fan as well. But definitely grew up in sort of the rock guitar tradition. And then he got into the blues and became an international star in the 90s and early aughts, Grammy nominated. And Alvin plays a lot in Europe. He's originally from California, but he then moved to Mississippi to take care of elderly relatives. And so he lives in Mississippi. He's sort of a working man blues guy, right? He has his van. He does all his speaker tech himself. He's always looking for gear. He's a gearhead as far as guitar equipment. And he's just one of these down-to-earth guys that is always fun to talk to. He was also a long time, he was in the Coast Guard, and so had the great opportunity to work on the Mississippi River as a Coast Guardsman, and also just had the experience of a lot of military people, which is, to see the world or see different parts of the country. So I think that's definitely influenced his musical career. But yeah, he was heavily featured in the Martin Scorsese Blues documentary that was probably 20-odd years ago. That was sort of another great moment for blues fans everywhere. And he still performs today. He has his rock and roll set, Alvin Youngblood and his Muscle Theory. They play in New Orleans at Chicky Wawa's a lot. But then he has his more traditional blues, his country blues sets, where he's sort of a solo performer. And that's what we'll listen to. But just a very distinct voice. Really great with Charlie Patton. Charlie, obviously has been dead for close to 90 years. And the recordings are sometimes, they're difficult to kind of follow. But Alvin will perform it live and talk about Charlie Patton, his influence on American music. And it's just a great live show. But yeah, just a great guy. Does it basically, he has a booker, but he doesn't have an agent. He kind of does it all out of his home. He's an avid hunter, so, goes and deer hunts and does all those wonderful Mississippi country kind of things. And just, continues to play, plays a lot in New Orleans, plays in Memphis. And then, Europe will call and he'll go to Sweden or Belgium or France and play over there as well. So definitely making a living as a performer and a blues musician, but also, keeping a foot into that world of rock and roll, which is great. And, just shows the kind of a way to make a living as a musician that, doesn't automatically assume everybody's going to be rock stars. So
here it is, Illinois Blues, Alvin Youngblood Hart.
my boys are coming through, coming through, coming through. Tell all my boys are coming through. Jim McCartney, sell my seed. Jim McCartney, sell my seed. Buy my baby things she need, things she need, things she need. Buy my baby things she need. Baby, things she need. Fix my pocket so my chain don't lose. Fix my pocket so my chain don't lose. Buy my baby some broken shoes, broken shoes, broken shoes. Buy my baby some broken shoes. Tell me, baby, stay that night. Tell me, baby, still at night. Home this morning, the sun was bright, somewhat bright, somewhat bright. Home this morning, the sun was bright. This morning, the sun was bright. You go to Bangley, tell all my boys. You go to Bangley, tell all my boys. The time I had in Illinois, Illinois, Illinois. The time I had in Illinois.
Well, there he is, Alvin Youngblood Hart. The Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB with Chip Mitchell. I'm Chris Davis, and I really like the part there at the end where you can really hear him start using those fingernails and really hitting that finger picking style. That's kind of reminiscent a little bit of Mississippi John Hurt.
Yeah, yeah. And, Illinois blues is great because it definitely has sort of this connection to the great migration of African Americans leaving the deep South and moving to other parts of the country and taking the music with them. We talked about it in our class many years ago that Muddy Waters, when he was performing in the Mississippi Delta, there wasn't a lot of electricity, right? He was playing acoustic guitar. And it was really in Chicago that he was on Maxwell Street and saw a music store, and they had these, cheap electric guitars and amps. And it was really on Maxwell Street where he just sort of plugged in and became and amplified that acoustic Mississippi Delta blues style. And then that creates the Chicago blues. And, of course, it's really the Chicago blues that has the biggest influence on those rock and rollers that we were talking about earlier. All that electric guitar work by Eric Clapton and Keith Richards, that's all, because they were in love with labels like Chess Records, which was all Chicago blues. So, just another great connection. But, yeah, this finger-picking style, since we're moving into John Hurt, I think, what's great about John Hurt is he doesn't sound like sort of the traditional Delta blues. When I say that, I mean that the Delta blues style is sort of a shouting blues style. It's using a lot of, not only picking the strings of a guitar, but thumping the guitar as a percussion instrument.
Very rhythmic.
Yeah. And basically because it was a dance music, right? So, juke joints, clubs, So basically, you're a one-man band, and you're trying to get people to dance, so you're going to figure out ways to do it. Plus, you have to shout over the crowd, right?
And you can't turn the bass up.
Yeah.
So you got to find a way to do it.
Right. And there's no amplification, right? There's no electricity in these clubs. You know, they have oil lamps lighting these sort of informal clubs that were in existence in the 20s and 30s. So that became associated with Mississippi and the Delta. And then you've got the Piedmont blues style, which is in the Upper South. And it's much more influenced by Appalachian music, white country music, old-time music, a lot of those country music styles, banjo. Obviously, banjo has its roots in African musical cultures, but it's definitely associated now more so with country music. And so it tends to be, a lot more string sound music, a lot kind of, I hate to use the word, but sweeter blues, easier on the ears, acoustic based. And so the fact that John Hurt sounds more like Piedmont blues than he does Delta blues is just one of those great musical mysteries. But, it was one reason why John Hurt was so amazing on the folk circuit and influenced so many musicians in the late 60s, early 70s. His agent at the time, one of the guys who sort of reintroduced him to the world of performance and the folk festival in the late 60s was Dick Waterman, who just passed away. Dick really helped to rediscover John Hurt, put him out on the folk circuit. John Hurt made a living because of him, introduced him to a new generation of musicians that were fascinated by that style, including Bonnie Raitt. And Dick Waterman was Bonnie Raitt's first agent. So there's these great, again, crossroads, if you will, of musical styles and influences that go back decades. So, but yeah, John Hurt, just a beautiful sound. Just love his albums. And this is, are you going to do Glory, Glory?
Glory.
Right. So it's a gospel song. So you see the cross influence of gospel music on blues playing. Again, these guys were walking songbooks, walking jukeboxes, if you will. They could play everything. They could play Sunday morning church services. They could play Saturday night dances. And so, yeah, Mississippi John Hurt, what a great performer.
And here he is, Mississippi John Hurt, Glory, Glory.
Lay my burden down. Glory, glory. When I lay my burden down, Lord. When I lay my burden down, Lord. When I lay my I'm going home to live with Jesus. When I lay my burden down, I'm going home to live with Jesus. When I lay my burden down, Lord. When I lay my burden down, Lord. When I lay my burden down, no more sickness, no more dying. When I lay no more sickness, no more dying. When I lay my burden down, will be glory, hallelujah. When I lay my burden down, hallelujah. When I lay my glad hand with the angel when I lay my burden down. I'm gonna shake glad hand with the angel when I lay my burden down, Lord. Burden down, Lord. Burden when I lay my burden down. I'm going home to live with Jesus when I lay my burden down. I'm going home to live with Jesus when I lay my burden down, Lord.
You're listening to Mississippi John Hurt on the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. And coming up in just a minute, you'll hear where people in Mississippi are learning about these kinds of things. And really, you know, there are several places to get that done, but there's only one that's right in the middle of where it happened. And that's coming up right here on the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. You're listening to the Blues and Arts Hour on 103.9 WYAB. I'm Chris Davis. Chip Mitchell is here, professor at Delta State. Chip, I want to talk really quickly about Delta State and DMI, 3 letters people need to know.
Yeah, the Delta Music Institute on the campus, my colleagues over there just do wonderful work. It's for the recording industry, students interested in the recording arts. They have these great summer camps for teenagers, for 12, 13, 14-year-olds every summer, and that's become a rich recruiting pipeline for them. But yeah, I was there last week. My collaborator Ted Fisher is a filmmaker, and he's filming Steve Azar. Steve Azar is an artist in residence at the DMI, and so it was very cool to sit there and watch Steve Azar work with young musicians and watch them do the recording process. Austin Rutledge is one of the engineers there, singing all the little lines on the big screen with Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. Just fascinating stuff, and so it's definitely a highlight of campus. And if you have your children or grandchildren who are interested in recording music and becoming professional musicians, it's the go-to place in Mississippi.
Blues and Arts Hour brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi and Small Town Music every week. And Chip Mitchell, our guest, I want to give you 10 seconds now to get us out of here.
Yeah, this is from Bill Ferris, the great Mississippian. He recorded Big Daddy Lewis from WOKJ in Jackson. Have a good day, and if you're driving, drive carefully. And if you're not driving, walk home, baby. We dig that too. This is Big Daddy. I'll see you tomorrow. The good Lord willing, and nothing happens until then. Bye.